But, you know, there's so much that needs to be said here. Eugene Debs, the great socialist leader, he was arrested for giving an anti-war speech. He was put in prison for speaking up against World War I. And the speech that he was arrested for, which he gave, I mean, it's about the 100-year anniversary, contains this paragraph. And I want to read this paragraph from Eugene Debs' speech. And I do apologize, some of the language here is not modern. It's, you know, sexist, I guess you could say. But I'm just going to read this paragraph. He said, "If you want to be respected, you have to begin by respecting yourself and look yourself in the face and see a man. Do not allow yourself to fall into the predicament of the poor fellow who, after he'd heard a socialist speech, concluded that he ought to be a socialist. The argument that he heard was unanswerable. Yes, he said to himself, all the speaker said was true, and I certainly ought to join the Socialist Party. But then after a while, he concluded that by joining the party, he might anger his boss and lose his job. And then he concluded, I can't take that chance. And that night he slept alone. And there was something on his conscience, and it resulted in a dreadful dream. Men always have such dreams when they betray themselves. But a socialist is free to go to bed with a clear conscience. He goes to sleep with his manhood, and he awakens and walks forth in the morning with self-respect. He is unafraid, and he can look the whole world in the face without a tremor and without a blush." That's Eugene Debs. Now, people don't talk that way anymore. And I think the reason, you know, that people don't talk that way anymore is because we've lost that notion. He's referring to the idea that people can make themselves better people by being part of a mass movement and organizing to build a better world. That's been lost in our society at this point. You know, people still worry about themselves, people worry how they are, but instead it feeds into a kind of chronic narcissism with Facebook and Twitter, and you know, people worry who they are, but this notion that we can be better people by coming together and organizing for a better world, it seems to have been lost in our society. And actually, I wasn't sure I was going to do this, but Sander actually inspired me. So, you know, I'm from a small town in Ohio originally. Almost everyone I knew in my little town was Republicans, conservatives. And people there were very, very religious. And I've had a lot of people, when you ask them about socialism or communism, the first thing that they say is, oh, well, you know, that's anti-God or that's anti-Christian. So I wanted to just reflect on that for a moment because, you know, I grew up in a Christian church. I was baptized and confirmed. And when we were getting confirmed, interestingly, we took 2 years of classes. And the first year we read the Bible. And the second year then we learned about the Reformation, Martin Luther and all of that. But interestingly, you know, we read the Bible, but there's a couple verses that we missed. To the north and the south, this is one of the verses that we just missed for some reason. To the north and the south, I saw a sign proclaiming death to the weakling and wealth to the strong. Anyone ever heard that voice before? And there's another one that said, there is nothing wrong with being greedy, as it only means that he wants more than he already has. Envy and greed are the motivating forces of ambition, and without ambition, very little importance can be accomplished. Anyone ever heard that voice before? Or the last one, man is just another animal, sometimes better, but more often worse than those who walk on all fours. Four Bible verses, I guess you could call them. We never read them. And you know why we never read them in my Sunday school class in Ohio? Because they're not from the Christian Bible. Those are from the Satanic Bible written by Anton LaVey. But I do have here with me the actual Bible, and I'll read you what the actual Bible has to say on the issue of socialism. Go now, ye rich, and weep, and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you. Behold the hired laborers you have reaped in your fields, which you work for by a fraud. And there was a multitude that believed and were of one heart and of one soul. And neither said any of them aught to of things which he possessed, or his own, and they had all things in common. And neither among them was lacked, for as many possessors of lands and houses sold them, and brought the prices of the things that were sold. And distribution was made unto every man according to his need. Wow.
Acts chapter 5.
Yeah, and one more. He hath showed strength with his arm. He hath scattered the proud in the imagination of their hearts. He hath put the mighty down from their seats and exalted them of low degree. He hath filled them hungry with good things, and he has sent the rich away empty. Now, I know there are people here tonight who are Christians. I know there are people here tonight who are Jewish. There are people here tonight who are Muslims. There are people of no faith whatsoever. And that's all fine by me. I think religion is a personal matter. It has no place in American politics. However, I'm reading that simply to point out that this notion that one has to be a follower of Jesus, one has to believe in capitalism. This is false. In fact, I would say, based on what I just read you, there is no reason that any follower of Jesus Christ should defend a system where profits come before people. You know, there's a lot of 1960s radicals still walking around, and they're a lot different than those 1930s radicals that I just got to glimpse with my eyes. You talk to some of these old 1960s radicals, and they say things like, if you're talking about Ho Chi Minh, they'll be like, well, Ho Chi Minh was a freedom fighter, man. He was, fighting against imperialism, so of course the American media was demonizing him. But then you say, well, what do you think about what's going on now? And they'll say, well, Assad is killing his own people. We got to invade Syria. And, that Putin, he fixed our elections and all of that. And you say, well, they lied back then to justify wars. You think they might lie now to justify wars? They say, no. Back then our reporters were a bunch of squares like Walter Cronkite. Now we got hip reporters like Rachel Maddow. She's a lesbian, It's the weirdest thing. But on a more serious note, there's a 1960s radical leader named Jerry Rubin. I don't know if people are familiar. Well, Jerry Rubin, he was being interviewed, and they asked him what was the greatest accomplishment of the 1960s generation. And he said, the greatest thing we did is we got rid of the World War II mentality. And I hear that and I think, got rid of the World War II mentality. During the Second World War, the United States aligned with the Soviet Union to defeat fascism. There was a feeling, that was the beginning of hope for the civil rights movement, because there was opposition to racism and fascism in the United States. During the Second World War, Roosevelt was the president, and he created Social Security and unemployment insurance. And towards the end of the war, Roosevelt even called for a new Bill of Rights to guarantee everyone jobs and housing and education. Why in the world would we want to get rid of the World War II mentality? It's the McCarthyist mentality. It's Joe McCarthy. That's the mentality, the 50s mentality that we need to get rid of. And to make matters worse, I'll even tell you this. There was a radical group in the 1960s they called the Weathermen. I don't know if people are familiar with them. Well, one of the leaders of the Weathermen was giving a speech at one of their conferences in 1969, 1970. And he said, we want to appeal to the part of every kid who sympathizes with Lex Luthor and hates Superman. Well, forgive me if there's any children in the audience. I'm going to use some hip 1960s terminology and say, no fucking way! Right? I have no interest in aligning with Lex Luthor Bezos. I'm with Superman, I'm with Roosevelt, I'm with the Soviet people, I am for defeating fascism, and I am for building a better America for the people of the country. I got to tell you, it's been quite an interesting evening. A lot of interesting words exchanged. I know all of us don't see eye to eye on every issue, and that's fine. And, I want people to be able to come together, but I must say, as much as I'm opposed to racism, as much as I'm opposed to sexism and homophobia and every form of oppression, I'm not a socialist because I want to destroy the United States of America. I'm a socialist because I want to save the United States of America. This country needs to be saved from the greed of Wall Street imperialism and bankers and bosses. I want a better country, and I don't want a violent revolution. Violent revolutions are nightmares. Read some actual history books. Don't watch action movies. Don't watch Hollywood movies that fill you up with adrenaline and make you feel all fired up. Read some actual history of what goes on. When the situation gets so dire that there's a violent revolution, that is a situation none of us ever want to be in. I would prefer very much so that the people of this country come together and peacefully organize and get progressive folks elected and build a better country and fight against the Wall Street rich in a peaceful manner, right? Violence, left adventurism that they call it, punchism, Blanquism. If you read some actual Marx, if you read some actual Lenin, you read the writings of Stalin, others, they opposed that kind of thing. They weren't for that kind of thing. The understanding was that Marxists were opposed to violence. They favored a peaceful transition. However, they were not opposed to people's right to defend themselves, which is a basic human right. And if you look at the great revolutions of history, and I'm running out low on time, so I don't want to get into all of that, but if you look at the great revolutions throughout history, they're basically acts of self-defense. It's when people are backed up against a wall and have no choice, they defend themselves. And I desperately hope that we never get into that situation situation here in the United States of America.